good just for now. I'm going to put him outside of this, right outside of this room right now, because
We lost Mark.
no, I'm here. I'm just getting rid of the
Oh,
dog.
okay.
All right, come on.
He'll be back.
I'm here.
I don't know if the rest of you hear me. David and Cheryl didn't have any power in Texas. They'll be on in a minute. Their power just came on and it may go off again. They're worried.
Are they having storms there, Joyce?
You here? Sorry.
Are they having storms, Joyce?
I don't know. We'll find out
Yeah.
together.
I hope it's not. Yeah, I hope it's over soon for him. So we're going to start. And for those who were with us last week, or for those who need to be reminded or need to be brought into where we are right now, we actually are reading the stories, the very beginning of Genesis. We're reading from the very, from the very beginning of this book of Genesis. We're still reading about Adam and Eve. We're still reading about being in the garden. And I'm going to share up the page right now for everybody. And here we go. So we read about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And of course, the companion tree to the tree of life. The people, and I say the people, the first humans, the people are two, but they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And again, I always want to say the knowledge of good and evil, because it doesn't say the tree of knowledge. It doesn't say that this was like all knowledge. It doesn't say that this was like knowledge, that it was like math knowledge. It doesn't mean that they didn't understand other things, but what it says is the knowledge of good and evil. And that was their rule, not to eat of that tree. So again, that's why I don't just say the tree of knowledge. Most people say the tree of knowledge, and that's okay. It's not wrong, but it's missing what the whole thing is. So the idea that somehow they were supposed to be stupid and not have knowledge doesn't really say that. But there is a certain kind of knowledge that they weren't supposed to have, which is the knowledge of good and evil. Now, we could call that ethical knowledge. We can call that a knowledge of morality. We can call that knowledge of behavior, emotional intelligence. There's a lot of ways we can describe maybe what that meant, but it doesn't say knowledge, just knowledge. And so what does seem to happen, though, is after they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that they're punished. They are punished by God. But even before that, they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And really the first thing that we know about, that we know happens to them after they eat of the tree of knowledge is, and again, we talked about how, God confronts Adam, he blames Eve, and he blames God for giving him. But when they ate from the tree, it says the eyes of both of them were open and they perceived that they were naked. And they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. So what seems to be the upshot of them having the knowledge of good and evil is that they are now aware of to some extent their sexuality. Because if you think about it, they didn't just make clothes. I mean, they knew that they didn't have clothes on, I guess, or maybe they did, but they seem to care about the fact that they're in particular naked. And what that means is that they made loincloths, and specifically that word doesn't say that they made clothes. It says that they made loincloths, which means that they were essentially only concerned about covering up their genitals. And I want to point that out only because that's what the Torah says. Now, again, when you learn this as a kid, this is the perfect example of why we have to not just read this as children, is that there does seem to be this understanding that the knowledge of good and evil also comes with it an understanding of some type of sexuality. One could even say maybe at another level, gender identity, whatever you want to call it. They understand something now about themselves that they didn't understand before they ate, and that it is connected to their genitals. It's not all of their clothes. It wasn't that they were just naked and they didn't have clothes or that they were cold, but that it's specifically about that, about sexuality. So keep that in mind, because as we get to after the punishment, which is where we finished, where God basically says, okay, man, you're now going to have to work for your food. You're going to die. You're going to be buried in the earth. You came from the dust and now you'll return to the dust. Woman, you're going to have to give birth in pain. And now that's at least somewhat connected to the way you're going to be fruitful and multiply. And then to the serpent, you're going to crawl around on the dust, and human beings aren't going to like you, and they're going to step on your head, and you're going to bite their heels, etc. So everybody gets cursed. And it goes in reverse. It's the serpent, the woman, and the man. But the next line after he is cursed is, and this is where we pick up today, is the next part of the story, in the next vignette, if you will. And I'm going to let Cheryl and David in. And Cheryl and David, you got here just in time, because we're just did a recap, and now we're going to actually get into the text. So for those who are with us on Facebook right now, here we go. It says, right after "to dust you shall return," the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. And so here we have Adam going back to his original role, if you will, of naming things. So he named the animals, and now he's named Eve. She didn't have a name before. He names her now. And so now, to some extent, we can now say Adam has a name. Now, it doesn't say that he named himself that. It actually says that, and again, you could say right here where he says to Adam, again, it could be to the human, or now he finally calls him Adam. Adam is a proper name, that now you are going to, again, be cursed. Then Adam calls his wife Eve, and it says he named her Chava, which is the Hebrew name Chava. And he names her that because it's a play. It's not a play. It's the word for life, for Chaya. So Chava comes from the word Chaya. And it says, from you comes Kol Chai, from all life. So Chava is the feminine form of for life. And it says now in the next line that the Lord God made garments of skins for Adam and his wife and clothed them. And again, we could say it says to the human, but let's say he's now starting to call him Adam, which is why, again, maybe it was early for them in the previous chapter to call him Adam, as it did sometimes, but now it seems that he's calling him Adam. Though it does say that God doesn't call her Eve, it calls her his wife. I don't know if that's intentional or what you want to make of that. But what's interesting about it, I guess you could say, the takeaway is that he makes them the clothes. So it says that Adam and Eve made these garments, these loincloths from the leaves, which clearly is their attempt to cover their nakedness. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. But now God actually makes them garments. And this isn't a loincloth. The word here is a different word. It's katonet or katnot, which is a word for a coat or an outer garment, more like a jacket or something of substance that covers you. And so it also says it's made out of ore. It says it's made out of leather. It's made out of skins, which also kind of implies that either some animals just got slaughtered, which, remember, people aren't given permission yet to do that, or God made something ready to wear for his first creations. He knows their sizes, and he creates it for them. Now, there is an interesting midrash about this because, hey, if God's making you clothes, these aren't normal kinds of clothes. These are special garments. And of course, in the midrash, these are literally impervious to all things, to all the elements. These are God-made clothes, right? And so This is like when you say the original Lord and Taylor, right? This is the Lord is the tailor. Only Lord is the tailor. That's not a pun, really. There's a joke about that. It's an old joke about Lord and Taylor. Anyways, the garments, according to the Midrash, never are still around because if God made them, they're eternal. So Adam's garment, which allows him to be invulnerable, impervious to any weapon. According to the Midrash, this garment gets passed down to Nimrod, who we read about. We'll read about him in maybe a week or two, or maybe a week. Pretty soon, we'll read about Nimrod. He's the hunter, and he comes right after the Noah story. Yeah, it's a couple of weeks. We'll read about Nimrod, and according to the Bible, he's a great hunter. And according to the Midrash, the reason he's a great hunter and the reason why he's so strong and so great as a hunter is he doesn't have to worry about ever getting hurt by an animal because he's got Adam's garments. He's got these original clothes that keep him protected. So if you want to kind of imagine it, then somewhere out there is Adam, and I guess you could say Eve's original garment that was made by God, because it can never go away. So that, this isn't just any kind of garment. This is a special garment with special animal skins that are essentially created to protect them, because let's watch what happens. The Lord God said, now that man has become like one of us, and here God once again is speaking in the plural, or to the plural, mimenu, like among us. God says he's like one of us. So who's he speaking to, right? Is he speaking to the angels? Is he speaking to other divine beings? Is he speaking? It seems like he's speaking to entities who already know good and bad. It says, if he becomes like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever? So the Lord banished him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. And so what you can see here is God kicked them out of the Garden of Eden. And the reason is this, we just read it. Adam and Eve can't be both immortal and know good and from bad. Because essentially, if they have both of those things, they are divine. And so what makes human beings like God is our ability to know good from evil, to recognize that, to have a sense of morality, ethical morality, innate morality, divine morality, according to the Bible. But we don't live forever. We can't live forever, because if we live forever and have that knowledge, we are divine. And there is something different about us. And so the way I like to explain this, and this is such an important line here. I mean, if you want to understand how our ancestors viewed us as human beings, what made us different from the angels, what made us different from God, or even the gods, if you will, is that we don't have immortality. And so this is an explanation to me for why things are the way they are. Why don't we live forever? The reason we don't live forever is because if we have both immortality and this knowledge of good and evil, then we're God. Then we're essentially no different from the God, from God or from the angels. And so we're not that. We're clearly different. We have this knowledge, this divine knowledge, but we don't have this divine immortality. And this is an explanation for why we are human, for why we are what we are. And so once we leave the Garden of Eden, we take on the life that we have today, the life that humanity has had ever since. So what this is an explanation, if you will, for why the human experience is what it is, which to some extent, and why this is so important is because essentially, I mean, this is the most important question we have to ask ourselves. Why are we the way we are? Why is our life the way it is? And at the center of that is, why are we mortal? Why do we die? And this is the line. I mean, this is essentially, this line right here explains death.
Mhm.
And so we're thrown out of the Garden of Eden. We till the soil from which he was taken. And then the last line is, he drove the man out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden the Kruvim, the cherubim, and the fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. And so we're driven out. And to keep us out of the garden is the Kruvim, these angelic entities that have a fiery, ever-turning sword that keep us out of the place where the tree of life is. So we can't go back to the Garden of Eden. We're stopped from doing that by this angelic being, which is not, as you can see, this is our first description of an angel. This right here at the end of chapter 3 is the first time that we actually have an indication that there is something that is angelic, that is the description of a divine being that's not God. This is the first explicit explanation for it. Now, later on in Judaism, we have very, very extensive angelic lore. We have lots of story, myth, legend, belief, whatever you want to call it, about angels. But specific identification of angel names, we don't have in the entire Torah. There is no angel that is called out by name in the first 5 books of the Bible. I want to make that real clear. The first time that we get mentions of angels that we can identify is in the book of Daniel. And that's the first time that we actually get the angels actually named. We have angels, obviously, in the book of Genesis that are called out, that are identified, that are anthropomorphic in the sense that we see them as human beings. These Kruvim are not anywhere identified as looking like human beings, other than when we get later on into the book of Exodus, when we have the description of the ark. It says that the Kruvim are on top of the ark facing each other. And it seems as if they have some human type body, they definitely have wings, and they definitely have wings in the description that we have in Exodus of what Kruvim look like. So are they angels with wings? Are they human, bird, part lion? Are they a composite entity in that way? We don't know for sure, other than it seems as though they're guarding the entrance to Eden. It seems as though that they have the ability to hold a sword, or at least hold this ever-turning sword that can, and that's the word that's used there. It's a cherev. It's a sword that keeps people out of Eden, so that they cannot specifically get to the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. And specifically, not even getting close, because I want to say, maybe I haven't noticed this before, it's not even to get to the tree, it's to guard the way to the tree of life. Et derech, that's the word, derech, which means the way to the tree of life. So it's not even like it's just standing in front of the tree with this, it's the road to the tree of life has been cut off. Is it a major difference? I don't know, but that word is here. And I do want to point out that their job is to make sure that we stay away from the tree of life.
Mhm.
And so this is an explanation for why we are what we are, which is not living in the Garden of Eden, not living forever, but we come out of it with knowledge. Now, I will tell you that the next word here is very clearly not Adam. The word goes back to Ha-Adam. It doesn't say Adam, Ve-Adam. It says Ve-Ha-Adam, and the man, knew his wife, and Chava, Eve, is mentioned, definitely mentioned her name, and it says his wife Eve, but he isn't actually called Adam there. So is he called Adam? Is he called Adam ever by God, or is he always referred to as the human? It's an interesting question. I don't want to dwell on it. I do want to point it out so that you're aware of it and understand why the translation now doesn't say, now Adam knew his wife Eve. The hey right here clearly indicates that it's the man, because it's not the woman. It says Chava Ishto, at Eve, his wife. And so it says here, the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore him Cain, or in Hebrew, Cain. Cain, because she said, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. Now it does say Ish. I've acquired. Kaniti is the origin of the name Cain. Kaniti means I have gained or I have acquired. It's also purchased, by the way, in Hebrew. It's the same word. All right, so I have acquired a male child with the help. Well, I could say with the help. It actually doesn't say with the help, but in the Hebrew. But I've acquired a man. I've acquired a male, literally a man from God. And then it says, she then bore his brother Abel, or in Hebrew, Chavel.
Mhm.
Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. That is what the words essentially mean. Now, in a sense, by the way, you notice here, Cain is named, and she says why by the way, she names him. Adam doesn't name him. Adam's been doing all the naming up until now. Now she names him. And it says why she named him that. Now I will tell you, it doesn't say why Abel, she doesn't say why, it doesn't say why she's named, why he's called Abel. It doesn't say why I was going to say why she called him Abel, but let's assume that she gave him the name, just like she gave Cain the name. Now, this is an example of the Hebrew clearly is a play on, the Hebrew is clearly a play. The word Cain says, I took the name Kaniti, or Kan, or Kana, which is the Hebrew root, acquire or got, and I named my son acquisition or gained. I mean, that's what the word Cain means. Purchased, whatever, I got. Havel, and anyone who is reading this in Hebrew knows what Havel means. Havel or Havel means like a whisper. It's the word also for vanity in Hebrew, but it means almost like nothing. It means literally like faintness. Now, it's a strange thing to name a child, because the name seems to imply, that this is not a child that's going to last long. By the very name. I mean, to name a child Abel is literally almost like saying, which is funny because the name Abel in English seems to like be connected somehow to like to be able, in which is, would be, you could say, to have ability, right? To be able to have purpose. It's almost the exact opposite meaning of the word in Hebrew. Havel again is, it means like a breath, like a whisper. That's what it means. And what's so interesting about this name is that you would almost say she's almost condemning him to be almost not even there. And again, without, what's going to happen in the story, but the Hebrew almost right away gives away what's going to happen. So here's what it says. It says that Abel was a keeper of sheep and Cain was a tiller of the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil. And Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of the flock. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. Cain was much distressed and his face fell. Now, before we go on, let's just kind of look at those 4 verses and what do they tell us? Because in this simple story that a lot of people know, you may have missed one of the most important lessons here about the ancient world and about the way the Israelites saw society changing around them. And people have pointed this out, and we've talked about it before, but we have to talk about it right now because we're looking at this and really looking at this, what happens here. Abel represents the nomadic pastoralists who were taking care of flocks. It was a way of life for people. It still is for a small amount of people in the world who are still nomadic and who still essentially take their flocks around. If you go to Israel today, there are still Bedouin tribes people who are shepherds who take care of sheep and goats. And they can tell you that they definitely feel that their way of life is under attack because you can't just walk around and make your home anywhere you want. Because in Israel, as we've talked about, all the land is owned by the government. There is no real private ownership, but there is private tenancy, and you can rent and own land with 99-year leases. And essentially, you don't want a Bedouin tribe of Bedouin people squatting on your land and saying, this is where we take our sheep every spring. But there were a lot of people in the ancient world who kind of lived this way. Now, usually what they would do is they would make an agreement with the city folk that were developing during this time as the agricultural revolution took over and people started gathering around cities and they started storing up their farms and they started writing down, the earliest records were essentially records of farm produce, and people started writing down how much they had of their grain and accounting it and then trading it and keeping these kind of records. That's why we started writing, by the way. That's the earliest records we have are essentially lists of product, of agricultural product. Well, that also meant now that the cities were going to have farms people around them and pastoralists around them who were encroaching on their farms, which would normally be outside the city. And then other people would be living in the city and they would be like, well, our farms are out there. And now we've got pastoralists that are their sheep and goats are grazing in our farms. You got to keep them away from our farms. And so you had wars between nomads who said, well, we've been coming here for generations. Mm-hmm. And then the city folk who say, yeah, but this is where our farms are now. And these are our farms. And there were wars. I mean, in the ancient world, we don't have all of those wars, but there seems to have been some major wars there. Now, there's even a possibility, my friends, that the early Israelites, the early tribes people that we read about, like Abraham and his son Isaac and their son and his son Jacob and those tribes people, we read about Jacob still in Jacob's day, that he's a nomad taking his flocks from area to area. Remember, it was Joseph who was taking care of, supposed to be bringing messages back and forth to his brothers that were out tending the flocks. So at least the first few generations of people that are living in the land of Israel are nomads. Now, if that's the case, then maybe the early conflicts that the Israelites were having were with the Canaanites who were living in these cities and who had their agricultural and city states. And on top of that, that they had they had this tension between the way that they were living and the way that the Israelites were living and the way that their neighbors who were living in these cities were living. And I will say, keep that in mind as we read through the book of Genesis, because we do seem to have a feeling in at least in the Bible, in early parts of the Bible, that way of life is the way of life that people should have. That the nomadic life is actually looked at with a nostalgic reverence that is kind of the way things used to be. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are even cases in the Bible, and I want to draw your attention to them, where we have city folk who willingly take on a life of a nomad because they prefer it or essentially escape to that kind of existence to give up the city. And I will tell you, keep that in mind, because we're going to read about him in a few weeks. We're reading about him right now in our weekly Torah portions. Abraham, we're told, comes from Ur of the Chaldees. Ur is the city. Ur means the city of the Chaldeans. It says he's from the city of the Chaldeans, which is Mesopotamia, which at the time was the major city of culture, the major region of culture. The other major city we talked about was the Egyptians. Well, guess what? We also read about an Egyptian prince named Moses, who spent a good chunk of his life living as a Midianite with his father-in-law Jethro as a shepherd. So we have two stories of people who are arguably the most important leaders in our history, Abraham and Moses, the first Jew and the lawgiver to the Jewish people, one Egyptian and one Babylonian, who essentially give up city life to be the ancestors of, and to be part of a nomadic culture. So think about that for a second, what kind of statement it means. And what you see in the Torah, and we're going to see it throughout the Bible actually, is this understanding that, is there a life out there that we're supposed to be living that isn't the life that city folk are living? And it goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, because the cities, as we're going to see, represent everything wrong about humanity. That when people live in cities, they stop being hospitable, they stop being caring and concerned with their neighbors. They become, quite frankly, uncontrollable and indiscriminate in their sexuality. There's no respect for privacy. And so all of these things happen in the cities. And there's a constant judgment in the Bible that this is not the way things really, humans don't function that way well. And so there is a willing there's a willing acceptance of this in the, that heroes actually did that. And so Abraham and Moses are the two, I'd say, biggest examples of it. But keep it in mind as we read through Genesis. Read, whenever you see people that are farming, it's almost like that's the first step. Farming is the first step to sedentary lifestyles and city dwelling and all the things that then spill out, that come out of that. And so keep that in mind as we read it. And think about one thing, that one of the last of the great characters of the Bible is King David. And we'll, we don't know, we don't know as much about King David as maybe we'd like to know, but we know a lot about him. And we do read about his childhood. And you know what we read about his childhood? That he's a shepherd. We read that King David is a shepherd. And we read that this little shepherd boy knows how to use a sling, right? He knows how to take a rock and a sling, because that's the way he took care of his flocks. So he kills Goliath with the simple weapon of a shepherd. Not a sword, not this great weaponry and military might that comes out of the cities, which, by the way, is another thing that comes out of the cities. War comes out of the cities. Organized warfare comes out of the cities. And think about what King David does. King David is this amazing poet warrior, but he came from a nomadic and pastoralist background. And when you think about what he said and what we know about King David, right?
Mhm.
His most famous psalm, Psalm 23, begins Adonai Roi, the Lord is my shepherd.
Mhm.
Now, this isn't an accident. These are the words of a shepherd who looks at God as his shepherd. So, when we look at what Abel represents, just remember that in many ways, he's not an individual. He represents a whole way of life,
Mhm.
and a way of life that's really looked at as being under attack. And the other side to this, which is Cain, is destructive, is really devoid of ethic, morality, and is violent. Because let's read what happens. Of course, they bring the offerings, and Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the soil, his stuff. And then it says Abel for his part brought the choicest of the firstlings of the flock. And again, people have pointed out that, Cain, it's not just what Cain brought. It's not just that he brought that, but that he just brought an offering. Whereas it says that Abel brought the choicest of the firstlings, that he actually took the best that he had to offer. And so one of the differences between them is not just what they brought, but the way they brought it and the intention that they brought it. And we know that right away that the offering that Cain brought was not accepted by God. Not the way that Abel's was.
Mhm.
Now, we don't understand how they knew that, right? The Bible doesn't really give us an indication. There's different ways there's different ways that's been depicted, especially in art over history. Usually it's, you see a sad Cain with an offering on a altar, and then there's either a flame, a little tiny flame, whereas with Abel's, that there's this huge flame coming up, and there's a lamb sitting on an altar, and he has a smile on his face, and there's some recognition. There's like light on his, and there's no light on Cain's. I mean, you can kind of depict it artistically, and we don't know. I mean, it doesn't say. It just says it wasn't accepted. And what it says is that Cain was distressed and his face fell. That's the words that are used by Blue Panam, that his face fell, which we assume to mean that he was sad, that he was frowning, that he was crying, that he was upset. So we know it's not accepted, and we know that it had an effect on him, which, by the way, does indicate that Cain at least had an understanding that he was doing something wrong, and that bothered him, that his offering not being accepted caused him, he reacted to it. And what it says is, the Lord said to Cain, why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do what is right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. And the word that's used here is timshal bo. Now, so again, God says to him, don't be upset. He said, he actually says, why are you distressed? And he knows why. He answers the question. Cain doesn't actually respond with anything. It's a rhetorical question because it says God provides the answer. Surely if you do right, there's uplift. But if you do not do what is right, sin couches at the door. Its urges towards you, yet you can be its master. Now, what's so important about that timshal bo, that you can be its master, is that the way that is translated tells you a lot about what the theology is of the people who read this. Okay, and so I'm going to see what the different translations are of this word timshal bo. But I will tell you that this is also quoted in Steinbeck's East of Eden. And it is a it says, Friedman's translation is it not that if you do well, you'll be raised? And if you don't do well, then sin crouches at the threshold and its desire will be for you and you will dominate it. There seems to be, again, this understanding that Team Shalbo, that you can be its master or that you can dominate it, is conditional, that if you do right, you can master the bad things around you. And there is this understanding that you have control over your destiny. You have control over these things. What's so important about this story, and again, even before we get to, what's going to happen, so I'm not going to ruin it for you, but just where we're at right now at this moment, God tells him a very important thing. Before he does what we know is going to be a bad thing, he tells him, you don't have to do the wrong thing. You can have control over your action. It's there. Bad choices abound around you. But you have the ability to master it. You have the ability to control yourself. And so this warning to Cain is obviously a warning to every human being that comes after Cain. Every human being is essentially told this by God. That, yeah, there are going to be disappointments in your life, and there's going to be bad choices around you all the time. You have a world that is filled with opportunities to make bad decisions.
And in many families, Rabbi Mark, there are favored child and unfavored children.
Yeah.
And the unfavored children don't have to choose bad behavior toward the favored ones.
Yep. 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 And what it tells you, somebody has the King James version there, don't they? Mike and Mary, do you still have the King James version there by you? Hello? Well,
I'm sorry. I just had you on mute.
Do you have the King James version? I can bring it up in a second if you don't have it.
Mary does.
Yeah, it says, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
Well, if you think about what the King James just said is, you shall be its master. This translation, which follows the Hebrew a little bit better, seems to imply that you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can be its master, but not that you will. You can be its master, not that you will be its master.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, by the way, this conversation that happens in East of Eden. Let me read you the quote. And it actually says in John Steinbeck's work, it's a discussion between one of the kids, actually with both of the kids, Samuel and Adam, and Lee, their Asian teacher, says to them, don't you see the American Standard Translation orders men to triumph over sin, and you call sin ignorance. The King James translation makes a promise in thou shalt, meaning that men will surely triumph over sin. But the Hebrew word, the word timshel, thou mayest, that gives a choice. It might be the most important in the world. That says the way is open. That's the line from Steinbeck. Wow. I mean, that implies, by the way, that, I mean, when Steinbeck wrote that, I don't care whose mouth he puts those words into, it means that Steinbeck understood and wanted to teach and wanted people to understand that we have choices.
Yes.
And it is not a guarantee one way or the other. You have a choice. And the Hebrew implies that there's a choice. So that's the word timshel, which all comes out of the word. And again, I just want to say it again. Steinbeck did a little drosh on a little Hebrew explanation on the word timshel. I'm not making that up. That's the word line directly from Steinbeck. Anyways, I found that to be interesting that an American writer from almost 100 years ago,
Yeah.
when you think about it, wrote that little midrash, that little explanation on the Hebrew. All right. Now here's an interesting piece, because the next line says, after God says this, God said to his brother Abel, ... And when they were in the field, Cain set upon his ... Abel and killed him. Now, the reason that there's a ... is we don't know what he said to him. So I just clicked on the note, right? And here's what the note says. Ancient versions, including the Targum, read, "Come, let us go out into the field."
What's the Targum?
That is the Aramaic translation of the Bible. And you'd say, well, why do we need an Aramaic version? Because there are some differences between Aramaic and Hebrew, right? There's different words. And people who spoke Aramaic, by the way, which were virtually all the Jews at the time of, we know during the time of Jesus spoke Aramaic. They understood Hebrew, but the daily language that they spoke in the land of Israel was Aramaic. Written in the same Hebrew letters as we write today, and a completely Semitic languages and very, very similar to Hebrew, but it's a little different. And so the Targum is the Aramaic. The word Targum in Hebrew means translation. And so there is an old translation, the Targum, which we sometimes go to, and the Septuagint, which is the translation into Greek, where we have lines, we have a line that's missing. So why do we have a line missing here? Well, this is one of the best examples, and obviously it's a very early example because we haven't had one yet, and we definitely have, well, we're only in the 3rd chapter, and we haven't had one that we know for sure. Well, we don't know this for sure, we can't prove it. Well, how did this happen that we have more than one word missing, right? Come, let us go out into the field. Well, what we think happens here is that occasionally there was a scribal error. And we know that there are some scribal errors because, and they're minimal. I want to say they're not many, but there are occasionally scribal errors. And so where would the scribal error have come from? And here's where we think it was. It says, Cain said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, which is the word sadeh. So what we think that where it was in the line in Hebrew, it went across the line. So there was like 5 words in a line. Vayomer Cain el Havel achiv vayihi bihotam basadeh. But before that hasadeh, where it says bihotam basadeh, sadeh means the field, and they were in the field. Above that would have been a line that said bo, achi, let us go basadeh, let us go to the field. So what happened is a scribe would have seen the word sadeh there, saw the other sadeh, and just didn't see the line, saw the word sadeh, and it didn't realize that they didn't copy down the line. Now, believe it or not, that could have wound up giving us 4 missing words or 5 missing words in the Bible. So it's literally like people were looking at the word, they saw the same word in both, and they just didn't copy the one line where the other sadeh, where the other line that ended with basadeh in the field was there. So you can understand why it would happen. Is it seems like that maybe that was the missing line. So keep that in mind, that there seems to be in here a missing phrase. I wouldn't say it's that important, because we know whatever it was that he said to him, they wound up in the field together.
Yeah.
And Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. And here we have the first murder. And it wasn't an accident. It was not, manslaughter. It wasn't, I didn't mean to do this. The word hargu means to kill. He killed him. The first murder is the first within the first family. So when we talk about a dysfunctional family, when we talk about what is possible to happen into families, the Bible opens up the possibility of murder in the first family, which of course means that never think that this can't happen, because if a brother can kill a brother, as it's been famously said before, all bets are off.
Mhm.
Never think that it can't happen in your own home. Don't think it can't happen in your own family. Don't think it can't happen between friends. Don't think it can't happen between people you never think could fight. That at some point, this is a possibility in the world we live in. And so the Bible actually throws that right out, right up in your face, that this is possible for a human being to kill another human being, even within a family.
Mhm.
And so it's a tragic story. I mean, there's nothing good that comes out of this. Obviously, this isn't what was supposed to happen. It also shows us, of course, that human beings have this propensity to violence that to some extent is born into us. And again, when we say all bets are off, what do we mean? What we mean here, folks, is that we know that humanity has a propensity for violence. Now, we come to the most famous line in this whole chapter, the line that everybody knows. The Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" So here we have the first lie. Now, he does lie to him. It's not like, some people have said, well, does he really lie?
Mhm.
I mean, did he not know? Well, I left him and I don't really know where he is. What's interesting about this, of course, is there is this other question that we have from God, which is essentially, where is he? Not what happened to him. God knows what happened to him. And I'm looking here. Yeah, you got to translate it as where. Now, it again goes back to the ayecha. It's the same root as where are you when God asks Adam, where are you? When of course he really is asking, what have you done? God is asking that, of course, to Cain right away. Where is your brother? Isn't, he knows what have you done? And the line that he gives back to God is such an audacious, it's such a upsetting line, because we know what happened. We're as the reader, as the person that's being told this story, we know what happened, and we know that his lie didn't just be, wasn't, I don't know. But the line of my brother's keeper is such a horrific line, because we know, and we know that what God wants him to say is exactly the opposite.
Right.
I am my brother's keeper. And so by implying that this is not his responsibility, this became the ultimate expression of human indifference. And I would really say the ultimate expression of human indifference, because essentially every human being is asked this question, am I my brother's keeper? And this is one of those unending, timeless, constantly relevant questions how do you understand that you're your brother's keeper? Now, obviously, in this case, he's responsible. He killed his brother, but of course, it implies that even if he didn't kill his brother, even if his brother was just lost and he was just covering up, the bottom line is this: yeah, you are your brother's keeper, and that's what God expected you to be, your brother's keeper. And so that's why what he says is so audacious. It's so reprehensible that he literally doesn't just say, I don't know, just shrugs and say, I don't know. But he went further with that line. Am I supposed to protect my brother? And of course, the answer is it's just the exact opposite of what he did. And then this is what God says to him. Vayomer. He said to him, what have you done? Your brother's blood calls out to me from the ground. I hear your brother's blood crying out to me. Now, this is the same words that God said to Eve after they ate from the tree. What have you done? Ma'asita. It's not just, it's the fact that maybe that God asks this rhetorically, but the words resound back to this mistake that his own mother made. What have you done? It's the same exact words. Ma'asita. What have you done? Now, here's the other thing that we have to look at. The word that's used here, which you can't convey it in English because there's no way of conveying it, is that the word deme, achicha. Deme is the plural of the word dam. Kol dam achicha would be literally your brother's blood. Your brother's blood, achicha is your brother. Kol means the voice or the sound, cries. I mean, it's calls out, whatever. It doesn't. That's not the important difference here. What I want to tell you is that this word is plural. Dame is plural. And so the rabbis knew that. This is not an accident. Why is that form of the word found there?
Mhm.
And the rabbi said something very interesting, which is that the fact that the word for blood is plural here implies that it's not just his blood that cries out. It's every human being that was supposed to be descended from Abel. And think about how many people were supposed to be descended from Abel. All of humanity was supposed to be descended from Abel. I mean, literally, even if you look at it as half of humanity was supposed to be descended from Abel, he just killed half of the world. And it's from this that the rabbis derive the lesson that if you take one life, it's as if you took the whole world. And the rabbis also said, of course, and if you save one life, it's as if you save the whole world. And so it's from this phrase, dame, it's from this word, bloods, really the bloods of your brother. That plural teaches us that line. Because we realize that if it happens then, and again, they knew that, didn't know how many people necessarily would be descended, but literally half of humanity would be descended from this one person. Mm-hmm. All the people that would have come out of Abel that never exist. All the other part of humanity that didn't come out of him. Now, again, the word havel means breath. It means air. And here he's gone. He's gone. And so now, what is the punishment for this? So Cain never takes responsibility for what happened. He doesn't, there's no, yes, I did wrong. There's nothing, there's no option here.
Mhm.
And so we have the punishment. And the punishment is this: therefore you shall be more cursed than the ground, which opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. Now, what's so strange about this, of course, is that there's nobody else on the earth at this time, at least, except for his family, his parents. So it says now that whatever you farm is not going to be easy, won't come easy to you. And you're going to wander the earth. You're not going to be able to find, a home, one home. So what is Cain's response? My punishment is too great to bear. I can't deal with this. It's too much. Since you have banished me this day from the soil, and I must avoid your presence and become a ceaseless wanderer on earth, anyone who meets me may kill me. Now, what's strange about that is that it implies that there's other people, or again, you could say there will be other people who will kill him. He doesn't feel a sense of protection. And he also seems to understand that he's not going to be in God's presence anymore. That no matter what, even though they're east of Eden now, as we call it, and again, that's Steinbeck's book, East of Eden. Even though we're east of Eden, we're not out of God's presence.
Mhm.
And so he's worried essentially he's essentially worried about three things, though he doesn't really talk about the fact that he's not going to have an easy time getting food anymore. But he says, I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer on earth. And then people may kill me. And so what happens here is that he's worried about what his new state will be. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that God doesn't just kill him. God doesn't kill him. And not only that, it goes further. The Lord said to him, I promise if anyone kills Cain, sevenfold vengeance shall be taken on him. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who meet him should kill him. Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden, which is further east because they're already east of Eden. We already read that, but they're even further east of Eden. And he says he's in the land of Nod. Now, what's interesting about being in the land of Nod is that it's the word for being a wanderer. Nod is, I'm circling the word right here, is the land, as the name of the area. It says that he's essentially in the wandering area. The land of Nod is the place that he now has to live.
I wanted to ask a question about the mark.
Yeah.
Is there a midrash about what this mark actually is?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. There's a midrash on what this mark is, because it doesn't say what the mark is, right? It doesn't tell us
Right.
what is the mark of Cain, right? How was he marked so that people would know this is Cain? This is the guy that you can't mess with. So what happens, of course, is that the mark is going to protect him, right? The mark is going to actually keep him alive. And people have tried to they've tried to explain this, because is this symbol a curse, or was it a was it a mark of protection? So the problem is that it seems as though it's almost a blessing that he has this mark. Now,
But
I
it's
will-
both, isn't it? A blessing and a curse,
well, I will tell you, it meant that everybody knew that it was Cain.
right?
But the problem is, that the purpose for it is that he's supposed to be protected by it. That the fear that someone would have by seeing him and by hurting him once they saw him is that it's supposed to keep him from being hurt. So some people say that he is marked with a horn, and that, you know, that this is something that everyone would see, and it was something big, and that, you know, it was going to be recognizable and clearly, you know, call attention to it. And the word ot in Hebrew, which is the word that's used here, is the same word we use for a sign, for an omen, for a mark, for a letter. Was it a letter? You know? I mean, there's a midrash that it's not even a mark on his body. There's an old midrash, very old midrash, that God gives him a dog. That this was a way for people to know that he was, that he was that he's a dog, essentially. I mean, if dogs were not considered, at least at some point, not considered to be great animals to have, if you will. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what the mark was, but the mark is to keep him, or at least to be a warning for anybody who would hurt him, that you are going to be punished more than if you killed a normal person. So, you know, look, there are crazy midrashim about what this looks like. I mean, when I say crazy, I mean crazy explanations for what this mark looked like. And I will tell you, since you asked, and since this has been brought up by you, that Francine just joined us, which meant that she gave up on watching the game. Her son is coaching the game. I guess 9-2 is enough for her. Anyways, so yeah, it's bad. So anyways, when Cain has this mark, assumedly it's a mark. It seems to be a mark, at least to some extent, it could be understood as protection, or at least to identify him. Look, I do want to, I mean, I'll just, since it was asked and it's an interesting question, when I say that there's crazy midrash about this, and I will tell you that there's people who've written stories about this and have developed this midrash. Some people have understood the mark of Cain to be indicative of the fact that Cain is actually not Adam's son. That Adam's son is actually, I'm only going to tell you this because it was brought up. It says, it doesn't, it doesn't say it. And again, it doesn't say that, it's an interpretation, that Cain and Abel are actually born. One was born through the serpent, and one was born through Adam. Now, it doesn't say that. It's an interpretation. I will tell you, it is kind of more science fiction, fantasy element, maybe fantasy element is a better word, but that Cain isn't a human being from a standpoint of human beings the way you and I are human beings, that Cain has and his descendants would have been different. And even it goes so far as people have written stories that because there seems to be this element of blood in the story, that Cain is actually a vampire. And I will tell you that there are no vampires specifically read from there, but it says, you know, to receive the blood that your brother's blood from your hand, that this seems to imply that, you know, that he shed his blood or took his blood and, you know, maybe drank his blood. All of this, again, is interpretation based on the fact that, again, that he's somehow not fully human or not completely human. And that there is going to be a difference between him and these other people. And that the mark of Cain is somehow some kind of either like vampiric, you know, identity or something like this. I will tell you, it doesn't say any of that. And we don't know. And it doesn't say what happens to him except for the fact that he is driven out even further away from God. And it says he left the presence of God. He left the presence of God. So however he was living before, the implication was he was in the presence of God.
Mhm.
And that the area that he lives in, Eretz Nod, which is like the land of wandering. And again, you lose that in the fact that it doesn't say that in the translation. You have to know that the Hebrew is the same Hebrew word that we had earlier on, that he becomes a restless wanderer. And here it says that Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore him Enoch. And he then founded a city and named the city after his son Enoch. Now, what of course is the bigger question right here, folks? Whoa, somebody?
Where'd he find a wife?
Yes. This is the question. This is the question. We don't know. The Bible does not tell us that. And again, we can turn to the Midrash, and the Midrash gives us some possibilities. None of them are necessarily great possibilities, in the sense that when I tell you that one of the possibilities is that Adam and Eve had a son, and they had two sons, and then they also proceeded to have two daughters who were the wives of their sons. That is a possibility. There's another possibility that what we're reading about, and at least it's a possibility, is that these human beings that are created by God inhabit a world where there are other human beings.
Oh,
Or if not other human beings, other entities that are close to human beings. And so there is a possibility that, and it's, I don't think it's beyond the realm of actual, that what the oral history is, that what we're reading about here is actually also, and again, I'm going to tell you this and it may blow your minds, but I do think that there's at least a possibility that what we have here is an oral history that seems to imply that maybe there were other types of human hominids, if you will, that inhabited the world. So what we might actually have here is an early version or a attempt to explain why we have a difference between, you know, the early Cro-Magnon human beings, our ancestors, what we usually would say as our ancestors, and early Neanderthal,
mhm.
which we know inhabited the world at the same time that we did.
Mhm.
And what we know, folks, is that that Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal humans, hominids, interacted with each other
Yes,
and had families.
yes.
And you can actually do a DNA test, which will result in how much Neanderthal blood you have within you. What's interesting, and I don't want to, and again, of course, the word Neanderthal became synonymous with primitive beings, and we don't know that Neanderthals were big, dumb, stupid creatures, which is what the word Neanderthal has become. It's become a pejorative word, right? We don't know that that was the case. However, we do know that there were Neanderthals that lived in ancient Israel because we have their remains.
Yes.
We found Neanderthal remains. What's also interesting is that Jews tend to have a very low percentage of Neanderthal DNA. And again, I don't want anybody to assume from that means that Jews have this or that abilities, or they're not like that because they're not Neanderthal. We do not know that Neanderthal did not have many wonderful qualities. We just know that genetically we don't. And it could be that what we actually are reading about here are the differences between different hominids.
Mhm.
And I do want to put that out there that it is very possible that people understood that, and maybe even understood it in ways thousands of years ago, as you got closer to when those Neanderthal were still identifiable and living maybe somewhat different lives. And maybe, again, people who had a higher incidence of Neanderthal DNA would live in one area, et cetera, that we're actually seeing here a difference between different types of human beings.
Mhm.
Now, that being said, Cain knew his wife, whatever her name was. She's not named. And it says she conceived and bore him Enoch. And he then founded a city and named the city after his son Enoch. So at least this is a possibility. There's an ancient city that is named after the grandson of Adam and Eve.
What does Enoch mean?
So this is an interesting thing, and I want to tell you that there is more than one Enoch. There is an Enoch who is mentioned here as the son of Cain, and there's also going to be an Enoch who is a descendant of the next son that we're about to read, which is actually where we're going to finish today.
Rabbi,
Yes.
interrupt you. I looked at my 23andMe, and my Neanderthal ancestry is less than -2% of my DNA.
Now, tell me what you think about that.
I don't have much Neanderthal in me.
Okay, but the point is that when you knew that, what did you first think?
Well, exactly what we were talking about a few minutes ago.
And again, it's because we maybe is not the descendants of Neanderthals look down on Neanderthal and think that this is we take pride in the fact that we don't have Neanderthal. Now again, now in our culture today, I'm sure there's going to be a Neanderthal that's going to now take umbrage on the fact that I never said that. I never.
But I'm also 100% Ashkenazi Jew.
I know.
I'm now going to look
Me
up.
too. 100%.
But I didn't want to. But you thought it. So.
But I've
Again,
also read that Neanderthal had tools and were much more advanced than currently
yes.
is believed.
Yes. So we've gone to knowing a little bit more about the Neanderthals and maybe having a deeper. That's why I said we don't know that they were as primitive as we used to think they were. Right. So we're changing our views of the Neanderthal as we learn more about them. But whatever it is,
Okay.
I will tell you.
Okay, Rabbi. I just did Mary's. She's also less than -2%. and she's not Jewish at all.
Yeah. Well, I will. Yeah, but now you feel better about her. Now be honest. Shy by telling us. Anyways, we don't know that. Again, I only put that out there as I do believe that there seems to be this kind of, if you will, this like maybe a version of different branches of early humans, because there really is no explanation for how they wound up with these wives, but they seem to have been people here that are also created. Just another look. I read this amazing science fiction theory that Adam and Eve actually came from outer space and are placed here to interbreed or to breed with the to breed with the other early hominids and to essentially kind of bring them, advance them advance their evolution. I mean, look, it's possible based on what we just read. That is surely a possibility. I would say that, it's possible. I would also say, just as likely that you could say that it's that this was someone that came from outer space. You could also argue, and again, it's a kind of a weird thing to think about. What if one day when we achieve the ability to time travel, that we actually send evolved humans back from the future to essentially help humanity evolve? So it's possible that, again, if Adam and Eve would have been the more developed humans from 1,000 years from now, that they go back and essentially breed with the original human beings that inhabited the world before that. Again, more of the early Cro-Magnon and early Neanderthal people.
Right.
Anyways, those are all, I would say that those are all possibilities which the Bible could have given its best attempt at explaining why there seemed to be this acceleration, if you will, of humanity, at least during this time, which I would say at the very least seems to be what we have here. So that being said, what do we have? We have this guy Enoch. And to get to what Gail's question is, what do we have? We have an Enoch, and the word Enoch means essentially experienced or committed. It's a good word. It's not a bad word. It's a good person. So it seems as though Enoch is Hanoch. It's, by the way, it's a Hebrew, a completely legitimate Hebrew name. It's our friend Honi from Chabad. His Hebrew name is Hanoch, which is the Hebrew. It's the original word for, it's here right here at Hanoch. That's the Hebrew. It's not Enoch in English, in Hebrew. There's no Enoch. It's Hanoch. It's a more common Hebrew name today than maybe it was 100 years ago. But Hanoch is a completely legit. It's a completely legitimate Hebrew name. So what do we have here? We have a city as well named after his son, which we find it later on in the Bible as well, when we see about the city of Shechem that's named after Hamor's son, Shechem, and we have the city Haran, which seems to be named after Abraham's brother Haran. So having cities named after people seem to be something that happened in the ancient world. There definitely is biblical versions of this. And what's so interesting about this is that we still have that. We name cities after people all the time. Think about how many states we have a Washington or a Lincoln or a Jefferson. So we have cities named after people. And here we have a city named after Hanoch. And here it says, and then we have a genealogy, and this is this first genealogy is what we're going to finish with. So Hanoch was born Irad. And Irad began Mehu. I'm going to use the Hebrew words because the English pronunciation, because what we know them by, but they're not in some ways as close to the Hebrew as they should be, because they come from Greek and then Latin and then to English. Mehuyael is the next son, and Irad begot Mehuyael, and then Mehuyael begot Methusael, which is not the same as Methuselah, though it sounds really similar. And Methusael begot Lamech. Lamech took to himself two wives. The name of one was Adah, and the other name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal. He was the ancestor of those who dwell in tents and amidst herds. And the name of his brother was Jubal. He was the ancestor of all who play the lyre and the pipe. And for Zillah, she bore Tubal Cain, who forged all implements of copper and iron. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said to his two wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, O wives of Lamech, give ear to my speech. I have slain a man for wounding me, and a lad for bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. So here we read about these generations of Cain. And what we read about, some good stuff, I guess, in the sense that we read about the fact that some of his descendants created these wonderful things like tents and created musical instruments, the lyre and the pipe, right? Stringed instruments and woodwind instruments, and also implements of copper and iron. Interesting, because we actually still talk about the major breaks in history. We call it the Bronze Age, right? And so to think about copper and iron, that this is actually saying that through Tubal Cain, we have this ability now to know how to work this metal, which now will lead to another advancement, if you will. Now, of course, one of the advancements in this technology was the ability to kill people. Bronze was oftentimes used for weapons, for chariots, and for and in some cases for protection from said things, because it was also used in shields and in mail, chain mail. And so what it was a very being able to use copper and iron together allowed, again, these two base elements to be able to mix them together to create an alloy, allowed for metals to be used much more effectively than the original Iron Age. We call the Iron Age. When we see that mark in civilizations where they had that technology, they were able to do far more, unfortunately, in some cases, going to war with people, but also they were able to farm more efficiently. They were able to produce other types of tools and implements with this metal, because it was both lighter weight, but still at the same time very strong, and was able to kind of have the best of both worlds, both the iron and the copper, the conductivity, and some of the things that were able to be done with these kinds of things now really marked an advancement for cultures that were Bronze Age cultures. So you could say some of the effects of these things were not good, but most of them, again, we see the advancement in culture through these things. But we also see through this story of Lamech, this killing that is going on. And this Lamech, who's one of Cain's descendants, right? It's one of Cain's children, literally saying, well, if my ancestor Cain was going to be protected by God, I'm a killer and I can get away with a whole lot more because I killed even more people than he did, which seems strange, but it seems as though what we have here is a race of humanity. I didn't say all of human race. I said a race, not the race. A race of humanity, which seems to believe that it can kill with no consequences. And not only with no consequences, that God is going to allow them to do this. Now, if these are people that are far more advanced than the other people around them, then when you look at what they're doing, is they're literally lording over these other people and kind of doing whatever they want to them with no consequences, and with the feeling that they're actually going to be protected by God. And so something has gone very wrong with the way that God's creation is being rolled out. And this little story of Lamech is the part of the story that's going to allow us to then see the flood story as essentially an answer to the Lamechs of the world. Because essentially we've seen that human beings are now developing, their technology is developing. If you read the story, they have technology now. They have weapons, they have music, they have bronze, they have again, these pieces of technology, but they also have this audacious violence, which they seem to think they can get away with. And that's why this idea to me that this is actually talking about a race of beings that have kind of gone off the rails because they have so much more power than everything else around them, the other people around them, the other human or hominids around them, that things are just going wacky. And God literally has to fix this, because part of the plan, at least the advancement and the evolution of people, maybe is happening, but there's also something else happening, which is that they are killing people without a consequence, and God has to fix it. Now, I will tell you, and we're going to leave it with this because we like to leave it on a happy ending, and not, we'll tell you right now that the score of the Dodger game was 9-2, which is a very sad thing. But for me at least, and I was there last night, by the way, folks. So my hope was, as some people know, was going very well. So what I will tell you is this: Adam knew his wife again, and she bore him Seth, meaning God has provided me with another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain had killed him. Now, again, it's not like we needed to remember who Cain was. We know who Cain is. We just read about him in the previous line. And if you didn't think that we didn't catch this, his descendant is named Tubal-Cain. His name is right there with Tubal. Cain is still around. He maybe, again, still seems to be alive.
What does Tubal mean?
So we think that the name Tubal-Cain is actually about the acquisition of technology. Because remember, Cain means acquisition or to acquire.
Right.
And if you look at it, it seems to mean that he is the acquisitor of being a blacksmith, and being able to control this kinds of stuff. So I will tell you that Seth comes into play as the answer, if you will, to help Eve cope with the loss of her son. And we are going to get into, actually, you know what? We have time, so we're going to read Seth's descendants. So we are going to read one more genealogy, and it's actually good we do this, even though there are some people who aren't here. Hopefully they can watch. If they're not here and they're going to join us next week, that they can watch and learn about this, because it is actually good to see it in the same session. This is reading a little bit more than I thought we would, which is fine. But let's look at what happens with Seth. So Seth is God's answer to Cain, to Abel, and to the fact that, again, at least Cain's family has kind of gone off the rails and is, by the way, not living with him. And again, I will say that no matter whatever explanation you want to have, it says right here that Adam, and not Ha-Adam, but Adam, knew his wife again, which implies that he knew her before.
Yes.
Right? And so there it's very clear that, at least if not Cain being the son of Adam, Abel was, and that they had a child before. I mean, I don't like, by the way, the midrash that Cain and Abel have different fathers. I don't like that explanation. It implies, number one, that there's like a race of non-human humans that are running around, which I know people like that idea, but doesn't seem to be the implication. It seems to be the implication that, yeah, Cain is a human being that kills somebody because human beings can kill people. And that's really the lesson of that. Not that there's some biological race of murderers, vampires or whatever. They're killing people. Or serpent people. Serpent people, by the way. No, I'm just telling you, that's what that kind of Cain myth that has now become, like, and I'm not making it up. I mean, this is an old myth, and it's been kind of revamped by people who like this kind of idea. But I will tell you that for sure that at least Abel is another child. And I will tell you that the word here that is used is tachat, in place of. And it says that she had another child in place of Abel. And again, you can say whatever you want about, it's not a good idea psychologically for her to have another child because her child was killed and no child can replace the child that was killed. You can say whatever you want. The Bible clearly says that that's why she did it. And that's why the word is tachat, in the place of Abel. Doesn't say she had another son, so she had another son in place of Abel. And it says specifically because he was killed by Cain. So whatever it is, she had this child to replace him. Now, here's the weird thing about Seth. We don't know a lot about Seth. Actually, a lot of people don't even know there's a guy named Seth. They know Cain and Abel.
Right.
They don't know about Seth. And what's so weird about it is that Seth is our ancestor. It's not Cain and it's not Abel. We are descendants, my friends, of Seth. We are B'nai, whatever you want to call us. We're B'nai Noach, we're B'nai Avraham, but we're also B'nai
Seth.
Seth. And it says to Seth, in turn, a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that men began to invoke the Lord by name. Now, it seems to imply, and what it says here is that people began to call God, Yud-He-Vav-He, the Lord, which is why it says B'Shem Adonai, that human beings start to call God Yud-He-Vav-He. So it didn't start with Moses. It just says that God told him my name was Yud-He-Vav-He, was the Lord was the name. But it says that they began to invoke God by name. That's what it says, by the Lord, that they knew that. And now in the next chapter, it begins with this line, which again, some people say that we have another author that now stepped back and gives us a genealogy. And again, we usually call this the priestly author, who seems to be very interested in genealogies. And this is where we're going to leave off today. This is the record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, which again goes back to what we read at the very beginning, in chapter 1, which we don't seem to have that. We've lost that. Now, again, you could say it's a different author, you can say whatever you want, but there's something very special about being reminded here that we're created in the image of God, B'Demut Adonai, and which is the different word that we had before. When I told you, it said that we are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Here it says that we were made B'Demut, in the likeness of God. So here it's actually replaced the word B'Tselem with the word Demut, which is the word why it says the likeness. It doesn't say the image here, it says in the likeness of God. Both of those were used before, and I pointed out the next line says that we were created in the image. Here it does say we were created Demut, in the likeness of God, which is again a different word. It says male and female he created them, which is exactly again what it says in chapter 1. And when they were created, he called them and called them, he blessed them and he called them man. Which again, it is weird because it does say plural. He called them man. It is a plural word. Which again goes back to the idea that again, the first human being was kind of split, but it doesn't say that. But it does say here that the man was called. And again, I don't know why it says man there. I guess they just they should have said both. If you really wanted to say that the name Adam means man, but here it says et Shemam, his name Adam, that his name is called Adam. Here it says flat out that he's called Adam. And again,
Mary's Bible does say Adam.
Yeah, and it should, because
Adam.
That's what it says, and it doesn't say Ha-Adam. It doesn't say the man. So it's clearly now a personal, actual name. And here it says, and when Adam had lived 130 years, he begot a son in his likeness, which is that same word, Demut, which seems to imply, again, that there was something about Seth that was different than the other sons. When Adam had lived 130 years, he begot his son in his likeness, after his image. Actually, I'll say it uses both words, Kitsalmo, but it says B'Tselem and Demut, and he named him Seth. And so there it actually says in his likeness and his image. Yeah. And after the birth of Seth, Adam lived 800 years and begot sons and daughters. And in case you can't do the math, 800 and 130, all the days that Adam lived came to 930 years, and then he died. Wow. Okay. So there you go. He lives 930 years, just shy, seems very close
Mhm.
to 1,000,
Yes.
to, 70 years away, which is interesting, right? Because that's one lifetime, right? It's not a lifetime. It's
Yes.
what the Bible says. 70 years is the life of a man. That's what it says. So look, that's why we have a second bar mitzvah when we're 83, because we've lived a bonus 13 years, right? Look, that tradition of 70 years is now interesting because he's living one lifetime less than, again, 1,000 years. And the rabbis have a wonderful midrash on this I want to just share with you. Where did those 70 years go? Where did they go? And the Bible doesn't tell us anything other than it's 930 years, which it can't be a
Long
coincidence.
time.
Can't be a coincidence, though. And so there's a wonderful midrash that Adam, looking ahead into the future, and Adam gets to know all of the descendants that he's going to have or that he would have. And he sees in the future, way in the future, that one of his descendants will be King David. And the midrash goes that King David was supposed to die in childbirth, that King David wasn't supposed to live. That as a baby, he almost died. And Adam, knowing what kind of man, even not a perfect man, knowing what kind of person that King David would be, says to God, take 70 years off of my life and make sure that kid David can live. So it's a wonderful midrash because it implies that, again, David was so special that Adam literally gave up part of his life so that he could live. It's an interesting midrash connecting the two of them, but it is a lifetime, and it's like one lifetime that got taken away.
What I
Now
also,
he's not the oldest person, right? Or as we're about to see. Yeah.
just back to this author, I noticed he didn't mention anything about Cain and Abel.
Very interesting that they're not mentioned, right?
Right.
And when Seth lived 105 years, he begot Enosh. And after the birth of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and begot sons and daughters. So they're going down a little bit. We're going down. If you add it up, he lives to be 912. But he also has sons and daughters. It says both. He has sons and daughters, right? He has sons and daughters. It says Adam lived 800 years and begot sons and daughters. It means he had Adam and Eve, they had other kids. It says sons and daughters. So there were other kids that came off, and then there were other kids coming off of here. But there's a line that's developing here, right? All the days of Seth came to 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh lived 90 years, and Enosh is the root for the word Enosh, is a human being. Enosh is another word for Ish. So, this is another line that's coming out of these people. So, it's kind of weird. After when Enosh lived 90 years, he begot Canaan. And after the birth of Canaan, Enosh lived 815 years and begot sons and daughters. All the days of Enosh came to 905 years, and then he died. So we're drifting down a little bit. And Canaan lived 70 years, and he begot Mahalalel. And after the birth of Mahalalel, Canaan lived 840 years, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Canaan came to 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel lived 65 years, he begot Yared. And after the birth of Yared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and begot sons and daughters. Okay. All the days of Mahalalel came to 895 years and he died. So we're seeing that human beings are living a little less each time. Now, again, our people look at these years, and we're gonna go over by just like 2 minutes. what we got here is that people are living less and less, which seems to imply that, again, these early humans, the first humans, lived longer, and then people are becoming more human, if you will. They're becoming, again, they're still living enormous lengths of time, but they're becoming more human. When Yared lived 162 years, he begot Enoch. And after the birth of Enoch, Yared lived 800 years and begot sons and daughters. All the days of Yared came to 962 years, and then he died. Now, I will tell you, it just popped back up.
Right.
And if you were reading very closely, we just read about another Enoch.
Mhm.
Hanoch. This can't be a coincidence. We have a Hanoch on Cain's line, and we have a Hanoch on Seth's line. And we have a guy named Yared, and we had another guy named Irad. Sounds kind of similar. And we had a guy named Mahalalel, and we had a guy named here Mahalalel. That seems a little too close. Names seem really, really, really close. And Yared, again, lives 960. And then when Enoch was 65 years old, he begot Methuselah. When we just read, there was another guy named Methusael. The names seem a little too close. Now, this Methuselah, of course, after the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch came to 365 years. Now, we don't know what walking with God means, but he only lives 365 years. Now, the problem, my friends, is that 365 years is 100% a symbolic number, because they did have the Egyptian year of 365 days. That cannot be a coincidence. And he doesn't live anywhere near as long as his ancestors do. And he doesn't live anywhere near as long as his son lives, because Enoch walked with God and he was no more, for God took him. And Methuselah lived 187 years, and he begot Lamech. Well, now there's another Lamech. And after the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and begot sons and daughters. All the days of Methuselah came to 969 years, and then he died. And he is the longest living of those people. And that's why we say today that someone is as old as Methuselah, because he is the one who lives longest. He lived even longer than Adam. So this is something very strange. And of course, what's interesting about Methuselah is that his father Enoch is very special because he walks with God, and God took him. Now, why does God take him? Now, I will only tell you this. Hanoch becomes the focal point for so much midrash and so much legend that I can't even get into it with you right now, because it will blow your mind. We could do a whole year of doing nothing but looking at the Enoch literature. There is literally a book of Enoch, and it is a very extensive book of midrash and legend. The Christians loved it. The early sectarians who didn't become necessarily Christians but were mystical peoples loved studying about Enoch. Everybody loved Enoch because he's so mysterious. And what's so interesting about him is that God seems to choose him to have a different existence. And so the midrash and the themes of Enoch are always good, in that he becomes somehow an angelic being. And why the early Christians found him so interesting is it sounds a little bit like Jesus. And so there seems to be a little bit of a prefiguring of what might have happened to Jesus with Enoch. And so if there's a precursor, if you will, if there's a story about a guy who gets taken young before his time, then maybe again, there is a precedence for what happens with Jesus. And so the Enochian legends, the legends about Hanoch, are so extensive and so big, and they do make their way into Jewish midrash, into accepted Jewish midrash, but nothing compared to what exists in the areas that we call the Apocrypha or the Pseudepigrapha, the books that are not kept by the Jewish people, but that were written very early on, even before some of our midrash, that Enoch is a central figure in books like the Book of Jubilees, which is one of those really important apocryphal books. And again, we have so much literature about Enoch that, again, we could do a whole year of doing nothing but looking at Enoch in Midrash and in the Apocrypha. But what's so strange about this lineage that we have in the priestly author, or this version of it, is that we have a very similar set of ancestors of what we call antediluvian ancestors, the ancestors before the flood. Antediluvian is the fancy word of saying before the flood. That these see very similar. The J author, or the other author that we have, and then this author, have ancestors that are named the same. And the key ancestor that divides in both is this Lamech. Lamech is the son of Methuselah in this one that we have, this one that we know very much about, because Lamech has a son, and he names him Noah. And Noah is called the one who will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands, out of the very soil which the Lord placed under a curse. And after the birth of Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech came to 777 years, and then he died. Now we will talk about why these people died, maybe a little bit younger, why Lamech died, maybe why even Methuselah only lived to be 969 years. Because what we know about this now, and the reason why this chapter ends here, when Noah lived 500 years, Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japhet. And this is where the chapter ends for Christians. It does not end this way for us as Jews.
And the Jews are a descendant of Ham, right?
No, of Shem.
Shem. I knew it was one of the two.
Yep. And when men began to increase on the earth and daughters were born to them, the divine being saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among those that pleased him. The Lord said, my breath shall not abide in man forever. Since he too is flesh, let the days of him be allowed 120 years. It was then and later that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men who bore them offspring. They were heroes of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. And the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, together with beasts and creeping things and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. And that's the way we end the portion. That's the way we end, with this very strange set of verses about these early human beings who are, at least according to one version, they are descendants of human beings and divine beings. They are a combination of things that maybe shouldn't have been combining. Because clearly what happens here is that these people, these divine beings, these divine hybrids, are not working out. They are living a very long time. They are very strong. They are men of renown. There are giburim, which is the word we use for heroes, but it also has the connotation of gvura, which means power or strength. These are very powerful beings, but they're not good beings. These are not good beings. And the reason, of course, that we do not translate this is because we don't really know what it means. We do know what the word means in Hebrew. Nephilim means the fallen ones, the things that were fallen. Now, of course, in Christianity and mythology, that became very popular as these are fallen angels. Now, it does say that they are, it doesn't necessarily mean that these are the same things as these divine beings, but it also, again, the word nafal means to fall, to come down. But as we said, these could also be seen as anything that came to earth, whether they were aliens or whether they were people from the future. there does seem to be the promise here that there was some kind of thing that happened here where our ancient ancestors, and it wasn't just us, it's every culture that we have that ever recorded any type of myth or history, that there was a time in this world where there were people that were stronger, more powerful, more that were faster, that were bigger than we are. Now you can say that that's all a myth, or that's all imagination, that, you know, that we're weaker than our ancestors were. But it is also very possible that these stories recalled the fact that there was some basis in the fact that there were human beings, or there were some of our ancestors that were indeed bigger and stronger than we are. Now, again, it seems as though some of the archaeology and some of the ancient human remains that we found are exactly the opposite. That the human beings that we found thus far seem to be smaller and weaker than we are. So it doesn't seem to indicate that there were at least a lot of these people, but the story in the Bible doesn't say that there were a lot of them. It says that there were some of them, and that these were not good types of things.
And that there was a giant line, a strain of genetic giants.
Yep. And the Bible is very clear. And we read about this, in the end of Deuteronomy, and we read about it in Joshua, that the ancient Israelites felt that the Canaanites were descendants of these people.
Right.
There was at least some people that were living there that were descendants. And the Bible is pretty clear that they believe that Goliath is a descendant of these types of people,
Mhm.
that there is some strain of people that were bigger and stronger than they were. And I think it's very possible that that is the case. However you want to explain it, how those people got here, whether it was just a strain of people that developed a part of the world where people developed, you know, very strong people. And again, maybe essentially they bred, you know, over generations, a very strong group of people. But whatever it was, these people were maybe too strong. And again, what happens is that God doesn't like what's happening. And God doesn't like the way human beings are channeling their energy. And what's interesting about it, the consequence of this is that God isn't happy with the way things have gone, which again, the word, and look, you and I can debate why it says what it says, but it says it. It says that God is not happy that he made man. He regrets it. It was the translation. But God is sad. It says, the word Vayit Atsev means God was sad in his heart. I mean, again, we don't have to say literally God had a heart that was sad, but in his heart, in his mind, God was not happy with what had happened. That's what the Bible says. Now, again, we can interpret it any way, you know, you can come up with a wonderful interpretation of it, but that's what it says, which means to some extent that the way things were going was not the way God wanted it to happen. And you and I have to understand that there is a possibility that things happen in this world that aren't the way that God wants them to happen. Now, that's what it says. And that opens up many possibilities. And again, there's a whole system of Kabbalah. There's a whole system of Jewish theology that at least is open to the fact that there's like an accident that happened here in this world that even to some extent caused creation to kind of go off the rails. And it's kind of human beings, our job to do tikkun, to tikkun olam, to fix these things, because God essentially has given us the power to fix some of the broken parts of the world. But that's a theology that grows out of this idea that God regrets the way things happened. Now, that also flies in against the idea that God has a reason for everything to happen and that God's happy with everything that happens. And I've gotten into discussions with people about this, again, sometimes my Christian colleagues, and I say, how do you interpret this? Because if humanity has departed and has created a situation where God isn't happy with what humans have done, then it's not original sin. because human beings have the power and the ability to make decisions,
To choose.
and that we've chosen wrong, and that God isn't happy with it, and that God didn't create that tree to help us screw up, but that we screwed up, and now we have to deal with consequences, and that every day we deal with those consequences, that every day we can make decisions. And it's not foregone, it's not a foregone conclusion, which, by the way, it scares people because it means that things can go off the rails. It means that God essentially doesn't stop things. Well, God does stop things, but God stops, as you know, what's going to happen. There's going to be a flood. But it means that things can go off the rails, and people don't like that. People don't like the fact that there is at least the implication that things did not go the way God planned it. But that's at least a possibility. If not, man, that's what I just read. Now, you can again interpret it in a different way. There are people who've interpreted those words in different ways, including Jews, by the way. There are Jews who don't like the idea that God made a mistake. But the fact that God says, I regret it and I'm sad with the way things happen, means that at least at some point, God is not happy with the way things are happening, which means that they didn't happen the way God wanted them to happen. I don't want to put things in your mind. And again, I encourage you to interpret it the way you should interpret it. But I do want to at least open up the possibility to you that there is a possibility that human beings have far more control over the world and over their behavior than some people would like to imagine it. And I encourage people at least to explore that possibility, that human beings have a whole lot of power, have a whole lot of control, and really have a whole lot of freedom to do both good things and bad things every single day.
Yes.
So I do want to kind of finish with that, because that's the hopeful part. And of course, the hopeful part is that Noah found favor with God, so that we shouldn't go out and say that it's not possible for that. And I do want to finish up with one of the things that we read, and I played a little bit of this before, and we're going to finish with this little. I know we ran a little long, but I want to finish with one of the songs that I really love, which has this version of the word Timshel. The name of the song is actually Timshel, and I'm going to play it for you right now.
Cold is the water, it freezes, you're already cold, already cold, cold. Death is at your doorstep, and it will steal your innocence, but it will not steal your substance. And you are not alone in this, and you are not alone in this. As brothers we will stand and we'll hold your hand, hold your hand.
I just want you to go out with this last lyric here. Listen to this.
And you are the mother of your baby child, the one to whom you gave life. And you have your choices, and these are one make mine great, his ladder to the stars.
And you have your choices, and they are what make man great, their ladder to the stars. So I want you to go out on that note, the fact that we have our choices and we have the possibility to achieve greatness. And again, I hope everyone has a chance to achieve some greatness in the coming days. We look forward to seeing you Friday night at services with Rebbe Soul, and I hope you have a chance to If you don't have a chance to be there in person, please join us online. We're going to be streaming it on Facebook. It'll be up on YouTube. And again, Rebbe Soul is a super guy. Bruce is a great musician, and he's just a great person. He has a great energy. He lived in Israel for many years. He grew up in America, but he went to Israel. He's come back, and he lives up north, but he travels around the country and is completely committed to spreading Jewish music of all kinds of different types of styles, Yemenite, Sephardic, and of course a lot of Karl Bach melodies and Eastern European melodies too. So that's why he's called Rebbe Soul. So I look forward to seeing you in person Friday night or virtually. Join us, please. So again, thank you, everybody. Be great and have some great choices in front of you. I will take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
for
Rabbi.
a Great
We'll
class.
see you soon. We'll see you
Thank you.
next week. We're reading the flood. Bye-bye.